Marcus Rodriguez had exactly 3 rules for surviving as the only human janitor on Galactic Transit Station Omega-Seven. Rule 1. Don't ask questions about the weird stains. Rule 2. Carry extra disinfectant because apparently half the galaxy doesn't understand basic bathroom etiquette. Rule 3. Mind your own business. Collect your paycheck and pretend you don't speak Universal Common when aliens start complaining about the smell. It was a simple system that had kept him employed for 2 years running, which was practically a miracle considering his previous job performance reviews on Earth. Turns out, when you're dealing with species that secrete acid when nervous or shed their entire outer skin weekly, human standards of cleanliness suddenly seem reasonable. Marcus pushed his hovermop through the main concourse, dodging a family of 6-armed Helix tourists who were having what appeared to be an argument conducted entirely through aggressive color changes. Their luggage leaked something purple that definitely wasn't on his approved cleaning supplies list. "Fantastic," he muttered, already calculating how much overtime this was going to cost the station. "Just what I needed." Alien mood ring people having a domestic dispute. That's when he spotted the kid. Small, maybe 3 feet tall, with pale blue skin and those oversized eyes that every species seemed to develop when they wanted to look pathetic. The little alien was pressed against a maintenance panel, trying to stay invisible while the crowd of travelers flowed around him like water around a rock. Marcus had seen plenty of lost kids over the years. Usually lasted about 10 minutes before some frantic parent came shrieking through the station in whatever passed for their species' version of panic. But this one had been there for 3 days now, and nobody seemed to be looking for him. The kid watched Marcus approach with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to expect much from adults. Fair enough, Marcus thought. Adults were generally disappointing even within the same species. "You hungry, little guy?" Marcus asked, pulling out half of his turkey sandwich. The kid's eyes went wide, and he made a soft chittering sound that might have been alien for "please don't let this be a trick." Marcus set the sandwich down and backed away. The kid grabbed it like he hadn't eaten in days, which, judging by how thin he looked, might actually be the case. "Yeah, I figured," Marcus said, already knowing he'd just violated Rule 3 in a big way. "Stick around after the evening rush. I'll see what else I can scrounge up." And that's how Marcus Rodriguez, professional mind-his-own-business expert, accidentally adopted an alien kid without knowing he'd just signed up for the most ridiculous week of his life. By day 4 of what Marcus had started calling Operation Feed the Stray, he'd established a routine that would have made his mother proud and his ex-wife deeply suspicious. Every morning at 11:30 he'd swing by the maintenance panel where the kid had claimed squatters' rights, drop off whatever passed for breakfast in his lunchbox, and pretend he didn't notice the way those big alien eyes lit up. The kid had started making soft trilling sounds whenever Marcus approached, which he'd decided to interpret as alien for "thank you" rather than "please don't poison me again." Marcus had tried introducing himself several times, but the kid just tilted his head and made more of those musical chirping noises. "Okay, so you don't speak standard," Marcus said during their 5th unofficial lunch meeting. "Let's try this differently. I'm Marcus." He pointed to himself. "Marcus." The kid brightened and pointed to his own chest. "Kip," he said in a voice that sounded like wind chimes having a conversation. "Kip, right. That's way easier than whatever I was expecting." Marcus handed over a peanut butter sandwich, noting how the kid's hands shook slightly as he took it. "You know, most species around here eat about 6 times a day. When's the last time someone fed you properly?" Kip's response was to demolish the sandwich in record time, then look hopefully at Marcus's apple. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Marcus tossed him the apple. "Where are your parents, kid? And don't give me those big eyes. I've got a nephew who perfected that look, and it doesn't work on me anymore." Except it totally worked on him, which was probably why he'd started packing double lunches and pretending it was just coincidence. The other station workers had begun to notice. Jenna from Information Services kept giving him knowing looks, and even Captain Torres had mentioned something about Marcus developing nurturing instincts in a tone that suggested this was somehow newsworthy. "It's called basic human decency," Marcus had told them. "Look it up." But privately he was getting worried. Kip was too thin, too quiet, and way too good at making himself invisible when other adults came around. Plus there was something off about his reactions to certain foods. He'd eaten the peanut butter sandwich fine, but when Marcus had offered him some leftover pizza, Kip had recoiled like he'd been offered poison. "Picky eater, huh?" Marcus had said, filing that information away under things that might be important later. On day 6, Marcus found Kip trying to clean himself with station water from a maintenance spigot, and that's when his last remaining wall of professional detachment crumbled completely. "Oh come on," he muttered, already knowing he was about to make another spectacularly bad decision. "This is ridiculous." Marcus had always prided himself on being the kind of guy who could handle surprises. 2 years of cleaning up after aliens who considered molting in public places perfectly acceptable had given him a pretty high tolerance for the unexpected. But nothing had prepared him for the moment when Kip accidentally shapeshifted. It happened on day 7, right after Marcus had handed over his usual offering of a ham sandwich and a juice box. Kip had been reaching for the food when he suddenly froze, his pale blue skin rippling like water. For about 3 seconds he looked completely different. Taller, more angular, with intricate silver markings across his face that definitely screamed royalty in any language. Then he snapped back to his small, pathetic form, looking absolutely terrified. "Well," Marcus said after a long moment of staring. "That's new." Kip made a series of rapid chittering sounds that Marcus was pretty sure translated to "please pretend you didn't see that, and definitely don't turn me in to the authorities." "Kid, I've seen a Zephyrian businessman accidentally turn inside out during a sneeze. Trust me, a little shapeshifting doesn't even crack my top 10 weirdest Tuesday experiences." Marcus sat down on his mop bucket, bringing himself closer to Kip's eye level. "But maybe it's time we had a real conversation, and I'm guessing you understand way more standard than you've been letting on." Kip's shoulders sagged in defeat. When he spoke again, his voice was clearer, more mature, though still carrying that musical quality. "You are correct, Marcus Rodriguez of Earth. I have been, how do you say, playing the fool. Yeah, I figured. The question is why." Marcus pulled out his thermos of coffee, because something told him he was going to need caffeine for this conversation. "And maybe start with who you actually are, because I'm betting it's not just some random lost kid." Kip looked around nervously, then moved to sit on a nearby crate. "My name is Kiptal, Crown Prince of the Nexari Empire. I am heir to 7 star systems, and approximately 12 billion subjects." He paused, then added quietly, "And I ran away from home because they want me to marry someone I have never met to prevent a war I do not understand." Marcus took a long sip of his coffee. "Of course you are. Because my life wasn't complicated enough already." He studied the kid, who was now flickering between his child form and glimpses of something more regal. "So let me get this straight, I've been feeding peanut butter sandwiches to alien royalty." "The sandwiches were quite good," Kip offered hopefully. "Oh great, I'm glad my bologna met your royal standards." Marcus rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache coming on. "Okay, so you're a runaway prince. That explains the whole afraid of adults thing. But why here? This station isn't exactly known for its luxury accommodations." Kip's form solidified back to his child appearance, though the silver markings still flickered faintly under his skin. "I chose this place because it is busy and no one looks closely at one small being. Also I researched human behavior. Your species has a reputation for unexpected kindness. I thought perhaps someone might help me without asking for payment or political advantage. And you picked me because I'm human. I picked you because you were the only adult who looked at me and saw someone hungry, not someone useful." Kip's voice got smaller. "That has not happened before." Marcus stared at his coffee cup, trying to process the fact that he'd just become the galaxy's most unlikely political asylum provider. "So what happens when they find you? Because I'm guessing running away from an arranged marriage isn't exactly standard procedure for crown princes. There will be consequences." Kip admitted. "For both of us I fear. My father does not appreciate when his plans are disrupted. And harboring a fugitive royal is considered an act of political interference in most galactic treaties." Marcus stood up and grabbed his mop. "Well, kid, apparently I'm an idiot with a conscience, because there's no way I'm letting them drag you back to marry some stranger just to prevent a war that adults started." He paused. "Though I've got to say your timing really sucks." "Why is that?" Marcus gestured toward the main concourse, where the usual chaos of travelers had suddenly gone very, very quiet. "Because unless I'm mistaken, those are Imperial battle cruisers dropping out of hyperspace right outside our windows. And I'm betting they're not here for the duty-free shopping." The thing about working at a galactic transit station is that you get used to seeing big ships, cargo haulers the size of city blocks, passenger liners that could house small countries, even the occasional military escort that made everyone nervous. But Marcus had never seen anything that made the entire station go dead silent before. The Nexari Imperial fleet didn't just arrive, it materialized like something out of a fever dream. 12 ships that looked like they'd been carved from black crystal and starlight, each one bristling with enough firepower to reduce the station to component atoms. They moved with the kind of precision that suggested their crews had done this before, forming a perfect blockade around Omega-Seven's docking ports. "Well," Marcus said, watching through the observation deck as smaller fighter craft swarmed around the station like angry wasps, "I'm guessing they're not here to negotiate." The station's emergency lighting kicked on, bathing everything in that lovely shade of red that universally meant you're probably about to die. Captain Torres' voice crackled over the intercom, trying to sound calm and failing spectacularly. Attention all station personnel and passengers. We are currently under Imperial Authority mandate. Please remain in your current locations and await further instructions. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Marcus looked down at Kip, who had gone completely rigid. The kid's shape-shifting abilities seemed to be malfunctioning under stress, flickering between his child form and something that looked distinctly more princely and terrified. Any chance they're just here for a routine inspection? Marcus asked. Kip made a sound that might have been a laugh if it wasn't so full of panic. My father does not do routine inspections. He does overwhelming displays of power followed by immediate compliance with his wishes. Sounds like a charming guy. I can see why you didn't want to stick around for family dinner. The station's main docking bay doors were already opening, and Marcus could see armored figures moving through the corridors on the security monitors. They moved like professionals, efficient and intimidating, checking every corner and questioning anyone who looked even slightly suspicious. We need to get you somewhere safe, Marcus said, grabbing his cleaning cart. I know every maintenance tunnel and service corridor in this place. We can hide until they give up and leave. They will not leave, Kip said quietly, and hiding will only delay the inevitable. When they find me, and they will find me, the consequences for you will be severe. Let me worry about the consequences. Marcus started pushing his cart toward the nearest maintenance access. Right now I'm more concerned about keeping you away from Daddy's goon squad until we can figure out a better plan. That's when the announcement came. Not over the station's intercom system, but broadcast directly into everyone's neural translators with the kind of authority that made your teeth ache. Citizens of Transit Station Omega-Seven, I am Commander Zrak of the Nexari Imperial Guard. We are here to retrieve Crown Prince Kiptal, who has been unlawfully detained on this station. The individual responsible for harboring His Highness will present themselves immediately, along with the prince, or we will be forced to conduct a complete station search. You have 15 minutes to comply. Marcus felt every eye in the concourse turn toward him. Apparently his daily lunch meetings with Kip hadn't been as subtle as he'd thought. Unlawfully detained. Marcus muttered. I gave the kid sandwiches, not a hostage situation. Kip tugged on Marcus's sleeve. You do not understand. In Nexari law, preventing a royal from fulfilling their duties is considered kidnapping. The penalty is significant. How significant are we talking? Life imprisonment if you are fortunate. If my father is displeased, he may decide you are a threat to Imperial security. Marcus looked around at the terrified faces of his co-workers, the families with children pressed against the walls, the general atmosphere of barely contained panic. Then he looked down at Kip, who was trying so hard to be brave and failing completely. You know what, Marcus said, abandoning his cart and walking toward the main concourse. I've cleaned up alien vomit for 2 years. I think I can handle one overprotective space dad. Marcus, no, Kip whispered, but Marcus was already striding into the center of the station's main hub, where Commander Zrak and his soldiers were setting up some kind of command post. Hey, Marcus called out, his voice echoing off the walls. You looking for the guy who's been feeding your prince? That would be me. Marcus Rodriguez, professional janitor and apparent kidnapper of royalty. And before you start with the whole intimidation routine, let me just say that your kid's been living off vending machine scraps for a week. Maybe work on your parenting skills before you start blaming the help. The silence that followed was so complete, Marcus was pretty sure he could hear his own career ending. Commander Zrak was exactly what Marcus had expected from an Imperial officer. Tall, imposing and covered in enough ceremonial armor to stop a small asteroid. His face was all sharp angles and disapproval, with those same silver markings that Kip had flickered, except these were permanent and practically glowing with authority. You are the human who has been harboring Crown Prince Kiptal, Zrak said, his voice carrying the kind of certainty that suggested he wasn't really asking. Harboring is a strong word, Marcus replied, crossing his arms. I prefer feeding, or maybe keeping alive. You know, basic stuff that responsible adults usually handle. Zrak's expression didn't change, but several of his soldiers shifted nervously. Apparently, not many people talked back to Imperial commanders. The Crown Prince has duties to his people and his empire. By interfering with those duties you have committed an act of political sedition. Political sedition, Marcus laughed, which was probably not the reaction Zrak was expecting. Look, Commander, I don't know what kind of spin you've been getting from headquarters, but here's what actually happened. Your prince showed up here looking like he hadn't eaten in days, scared of his own shadow, and trying to hide from every adult who came near him. So I gave him sandwiches. That's not sedition, that's basic human decency. Human decency, Zrak repeated, like he was tasting the words and finding them confusing. Yeah, you might want to look it up. It's this crazy concept where you help people who need help, regardless of whether there's anything in it for you. Kip had appeared at the edge of the crowd, still in his child form but with those silver markings becoming more visible. "Commander Zrak," he said, his voice carrying a hint of the authority Marcus had heard earlier. "This human speaks truly. He has shown me kindness without agenda. He has committed no crime." "Your Highness," Zrak said, immediately shifting to a more respectful tone. "Your father, Emperor Vexter, has been most concerned about your safety. The alliance with the Corvan Empire depends on your union with Princess Voltra. The wedding must proceed as planned." "There it is," Marcus said. "The real reason you're here. This isn't about kidnapping or sedition. This is about making sure the kid goes through with an arranged marriage he doesn't want." Zrak's jaw tightened. "The union will prevent a war that would consume billions of lives. The Crown Prince's personal preferences are secondary to the welfare of the galaxy." "Says who? You, the Emperor? When did anyone ask the kid what he wanted?" "I am not a child," Kip said, and his voice carried enough authority to make everyone in the concourse take a step back. "I am Crown Prince Kiptal, of the Nexari Empire, heir to 7 star systems, and I will not be treated as a bargaining chip." Marcus felt a surge of pride. The kid was finally standing up for himself. "Your Highness," Zrak said carefully. "The consequences of refusing this alliance will be war," Kip finished. "Yes, I know, I have heard this argument many times, but perhaps there are other solutions. Perhaps someone should have asked the Corvan Empire what they truly want before assuming military conquest was their only goal." Marcus blinked. "Wait, what? You mean nobody's actually tried talking to them?" "The Corvan Empire has been expanding aggressively for decades," Zrak explained, though he was starting to sound less certain. "Their demands for territory." "Have you asked them why they're expanding?" Marcus interrupted. "Because in my experience, when someone's grabbing for more stuff, it's usually because they don't have enough of something else." The conversation was interrupted by a new voice, one that made everyone in the concourse immediately drop to their knees. Everyone except Marcus, who just turned around to see who else had decided to crash this party. Emperor Vexter was not what Marcus had expected. Sure, he was tall and imposing like his commander, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was tired of being tall and imposing. He looked like a man who'd been carrying the weight of an empire for too long. "Commander Zrak," the Emperor said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that could probably be heard from orbit. "I believe I ordered you to retrieve my son, not conduct a diplomatic seminar." "Your Imperial Majesty," Zrak stammered. "The human was interfering with." "The human," Emperor Vexter said, looking directly at Marcus with an expression that was impossible to read, "appears to be the only adult in this situation who has been treating my son like a person rather than a political asset. I find that interesting." Marcus decided that if he was going to die, he might as well go out swinging. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, your kid ran away because he was scared and hungry and didn't want to marry a stranger. Maybe instead of sending the Space Marines, you could have tried asking him what was wrong." The Emperor stared at him for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled. "You know, human, you might be right. Perhaps it is time for a different approach." Emperor Vextar moved through the crowd with the kind of presence that made gravity seem negotiable. Everyone remained on their knees except Marcus, who figured he'd already committed enough acts of lèse-majesté for one day, and Kip, who had finally stopped flickering between forms, and was standing in his true shape for the first time since Marcus had met him. The real Crown Prince Kiptal was actually pretty impressive. Taller than his child disguise, with those silver markings forming intricate patterns across his pale blue skin that seemed to shift and flow like living artwork. He looked like someone who could rule star systems, but more importantly, he looked like someone who didn't want to. "Father," Kip said, his voice carrying both respect and defiance in equal measure, "I will not marry Princess Voltra." "I know," Emperor Vextar replied, which was apparently not the response anyone was expecting. Commander Zrak actually made a choking sound. "Your Majesty," Zrak stammered, "the alliance with the Corvan Empire has been bothering me for months." The Emperor interrupted. "Do you know what I discovered when I actually read the Corvan diplomatic communications instead of letting the War Council summarize them for me?" He turned to address the crowd, though his eyes kept drifting back to Marcus. "The Corvan Empire has been expanding because their home system is dying, their star is becoming unstable, and they need to relocate approximately 40 billion citizens before it goes supernova." Marcus felt pieces clicking together in his head. "So they're not trying to conquer anyone, they're trying to save their people." "Exactly. But our diplomatic corps interpreted their requests for territory as military aggression, and responded accordingly." The Emperor looked genuinely frustrated. "Sometimes I think the entire galaxy has forgotten how to have a simple conversation." "Your Majesty," Kip said carefully, "if the Corvan Empire needs relocation assistance rather than a military alliance, then we can offer them uninhabited systems in the Outer Rim, along with the technology and resources to establish new colonies. No marriage required. The Emperor's smile was rueful. It will cost us significantly less than a war, and will gain valuable allies instead of reluctant subjects. Marcus rubbed his forehead, feeling like he'd missed something important. Wait, if you already figured this out, why did you send the Imperial fleet to drag Kip back? Emperor Vextar had the grace to look embarrassed. Because I am a father who panicked when his son disappeared, and I let my emotions override my judgment. Also, I may have wanted to meet the human who convinced my son that adults could be trusted. I didn't convince him of anything, Marcus protested. I just gave him food and treated him like a person. Precisely. The Emperor stepped closer, and Marcus realized that up close he looked tired. Not just physically tired, but soul-deep exhausted in the way that came from making impossible decisions for too long. Do you know how many adults have interacted with my son in the past year without wanting something from him? How many have seen him as Kip rather than Crown Prince Kiptal? Marcus looked around at the assembled crowd, the nervous officials, the soldiers standing at attention, all of them focused on the political implications of everything being said. I'm guessing not many. You would be correct. Which brings me to an interesting proposition. The Emperor's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. The Nexari Empire is in need of a new cultural liaison. Someone who understands how to treat people as individuals rather than political assets. Someone with experience in practical problem solving. Marcus stared at him. Are you offering me a job? I am offering you a position as diplomatic custodial engineer, with full authority to clean up the messes our traditional diplomats seem incapable of handling. The Emperor's smile was definitely amused now. The pay is considerably better than station maintenance, and the benefits include diplomatic immunity and the authority to tell Imperial commanders when they're being idiots. Commander's Rock made another choking sound. Plus, Kip added, grinning in a way that made him look like the kid Marcus had been feeding sandwiches to, you would be able to continue providing dietary advice to members of the royal family. Marcus looked around at the assembled crowd, at the massive Imperial fleet visible through the station windows, at the job that had defined his life for the past 2 years. Then he looked at Kip, who was waiting with the kind of hopeful expression that suggested this mattered to him more than the political implications. Do I get to keep my mop? Marcus asked. You can have an entire fleet of mops, the Emperor replied. Ceremonial mops, if you prefer. And I can tell people when they're being stupid, even if they outrank me. Especially if they outrank you. I find that the higher someone rises in government, the more they need to be reminded of basic common sense. Marcus considered this. It wasn't the career path he'd imagined when he'd started sharing his lunch with a hungry kid, but then again, nothing about the past week had gone according to plan. One condition, he said. Kip gets to choose his own path. No arranged marriages, no political pawns, just a chance to figure out who he wants to be. Agreed, the Emperor said immediately. Though I should warn you, he will still be Crown Prince. There will be duties and responsibilities. That's fine, Kip said, and his voice carried the kind of quiet confidence that suggested he'd been doing some serious thinking. But I want to earn the right to lead, not just inherit it. And I want to understand the people I'll be governing, not just rule them from a distance. Marcus nodded approvingly. Smart kid, you're going to make a good emperor someday. Someday, Emperor Vextar agreed. But not today. Today he gets to be young and learn from a human who understands that leadership starts with kindness. And that's how Marcus Rodriguez went from being a janitor who minded his own business to being the galaxy's first diplomatic custodial engineer, with a salary that made his ex-wife deeply regret her life choices, and a job description that basically amounted to fix the problems that smart people make worse. 6 months later, he was mediating a trade dispute between 3 different species while Kip took notes and occasionally handed him a sandwich. The Corvan Empire had successfully relocated to their new worlds, the threat of war had been replaced by a thriving cultural exchange program, and Marcus had discovered that his talent for cutting through bureaucratic nonsense was apparently considered a rare and valuable skill in galactic politics. He still carried a mop, though now it was made of some kind of crystalline material that supposedly represented the cleansing power of truth, or something equally pretentious. But it worked just fine for cleaning up spills, which happen more often than you'd expect in diplomatic negotiations involving species that communicated through scent. You know, Kip said, during a break in their latest crisis mediation, I never did thank you properly for sharing your sandwiches. Marcus looked up from the mess he was cleaning, caused by a hegemony ambassador who had literally exploded with indignation during trade talks. Kid, you helped me discover that I'm apparently good at something other than mopping floors. I think we're even. Still, Kip insisted. It was the first time an adult had been kind to me without expecting something in return. that matters. Marcus stood up, wringing out his ceremonial mop, with the dignity befitting a man who had accidentally prevented a galactic war through the simple act of feeding a hungry child. You know what I learned from all this, he said. Sometimes the biggest problems in the galaxy come down to the same thing. Somebody forgot to treat somebody else like a person. And sometimes the solution is as simple as sharing your lunch. Kip smiled, that same hopeful expression he'd worn as a scared kid, hiding behind a maintenance panel. Think there are any other problems we can solve with sandwiches? Marcus looked out at the stars, where ships from dozens of different species were traveling safely through space that had been a war zone just months ago, and grinned. Kid, I'm willing to bet there are problems out there we haven't even imagined yet. Good thing we packed extra food.